Welcome to another podcast of the Riffle series. The Riffle a podcast series brought to you by 10 Leaves. When you open an app on your phone to send money, there is this expectation of just like total frictionless magic.
Yeah, you just tap a button.
Right. You tap a button and instantly money moves across the globe. It feels, I don't know, as light as air.
Absolutely.
But beneath that frictionless surface, down in the plumbing of the global financial system, there is this massive high-stakes filtration process.
Oh, yeah. A huge one.
And it's hunting for dirty money in real time.
And it's a filtration system operating under immense competing pressures. I mean, the people running it have to catch impurities like the proceeds of crime, fraud, terrorist financing, without clogging up the pipes for legitimate global commerce.
Which is a tough balance.
It is. And if they fail, the consequences aren't just, regulatory fines. They could be entirely geopolitical.
Right. So today we're looking at the blueprint for the people who actually operate those filters, specifically in one of the wealthiest, fastest-moving financial hubs on Earth.
The UAE.
Exactly. We are going on a deep dive into a really fascinating piece of source material today. It's a document called the Joint Guidance on the AML CFT CPF Compliance Officer and Money Laundering Reporting Officer function in the United Arab Emirates.
I don't know that title.
It sounds like a total mouthful of alphabet soup, right? But stick with us, because this is the playbook for how a massive financial ecosystem protects itself from the inside out.
Yeah, it really is the foundation.
So let's translate that alphabet soup for you real quick, because these acronyms, they represent these specific existential threats these institutions are fighting every single day.
Yeah, it helps to break them down by the harm they cause, I think.
Right.
So AML stands for anti-money laundering.
Which is kind of the classic one everyone knows.
Right, the systemic process of stopping criminals from making illicit cash look like legitimate taxable funds. Then you have CFT, which is combating the financing of terrorism.
Okay, that one is self-explanatory and terrifying.
Very. And then CPF, which is a much newer and honestly often overlooked pillar, is combating proliferation financing.
Wait, proliferation of what?
Weapons of mass destruction.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. It specifically means stopping the funding of those weapons. So the mandate we are discussing today, it's about intercepting funds that could literally destabilize entire nations.
See, it always sounds a bit sci-fi to me, but the stakes are just unimaginably high. And what jumps out immediately about this specific guidance is the word joint.
Yes, that's a crucial word here.
Because the UAE isn't just like issuing piecemeal rules for one type of legacy bank. This document represents a completely unified framework across a wildly diverse regulatory landscape.
Right.
We're talking about expectations being aligned by the Central Bank of the UAE, the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, right, which handles the incredibly fast-moving crypto space, and even the General Commercial Gaming Regulatory Authority.
Yeah, and that alignment is historic, honestly. It means that whether you are a traditional legacy bank holding, century-old wealth,
Right,
or a cutting-edge crypto exchange processing thousands of trades a second, or even a high-end real estate firm.
what the regulators call DNFBPs, right? Designated non-financial businesses and professions.
Exactly. No matter which one of those you are, the rules of the game are standardized now. The authorities are demanding a uniform level of defense across the board.
Leaving basically no blind spots for illicit actors to exploit, or at least trying not to.
Trying very hard not to, yeah.
So if the rules are finally standardized across crypto, gaming, traditional banking, the obvious vulnerability isn't really the rulebook anymore. It's the human enforcing it.
100%.
To make this work, every single institution needs a designated champion inside the building. The compliance officer or the money laundering reporting officer, the MLRO.
Right?
But who are they really? Because you can give someone a fancy title in a nice corner office, but if they don't have the real structural authority to actually stand up to a tech CEO who wants to, move fast and break things.
The title is just window dressing.
Exactly. It means nothing.
And the regulators anticipated that exact vulnerability. That is why the core pillar of this guidance mandates a concept called operational independence.
Operational independence. Okay, break that down.
So the MLRO cannot just be a mid-level manager buried deep in the organizational chart, reporting through endless layers of bureaucracy.
Right.
They must hold a senior management position, and they must have direct, totally unfiltered access to the governing board.
So they can bypass the CEO.
Yes. They need the authority to bypass the executive suite entirely if they spot a critical systemic failure.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and it kind of reminds me of a safety inspector at a massive billion-dollar construction site.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Because, you want the building to go up fast. The developers want to hit their deadlines, the investors want the returns, and the sales team wants to start selling condos immediately.
Everybody wants to move fast.
Right. But the safety inspector needs to be senior enough to walk onto that site, look at like a microscopic crack in the foundation, and just say, stop everything. We aren't pouring another ounce of concrete until this is fixed.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is the regulators take that safety inspector analogy a step further. They actively neutralize the financial incentives that might tempt them to look the other way.
Okay, how do they do that?
Well, the guidance dictates that the MLRO's judgment must be entirely free from pecuniary or financial conflicts of interest.
Meaning, if the safety inspector gets a massive year-end bonus based on how fast the building goes up.
Exactly. Suddenly, they might convince themselves that a few cracks in the foundation aren't really that big of a deal.
Yeah, human nature kicks in.
They absolutely would. Human nature and financial incentives are inextricably linked. Therefore, the guidance draws a hard line. An MLRO cannot have day-to-day responsibilities for sales or business development or customer relationship management.
So no overlapping roles.
None. You cannot be the rainmaker whose performance review depends on bringing in millions of dollars in new client money.
While simultaneously acting as the gatekeeper, deciding if that client's money is clean.
Right. The psychological and financial conflict of trying to wear both hats is simply too great.
It makes complete sense. You also can't just, I assume, pull anyone off the street or import some generic operations executive to fill the seat.
Definitely not.
The source material spends a lot of time outlining a very strict fit and proper test.
It is a grueling vetting process, honestly. Appointing an MLRO requires assessing their personal integrity, their formal qualifications, and the professional track record in financial crime prevention.
Right.
But crucially, they must possess deep UAE-specific sector knowledge.
So you can't just parachute a brilliant compliance officer from London or New York?
No, because if they don't understand the local regulatory nuances of the UAE Central Bank, or VERAR, you can't expect them to effectively navigate the local risk landscape.
They have to know the neighborhood.
Exactly. They have to understand the specific geopolitical and economic currents of the region.
Okay, so we have our fiercely independent, highly vetted watchdog in place. They've passed the fit and proper test, they've got the direct line to the board, and they have no financial incentive to cheat.
Right, the perfect setup.
What does the day-to-day actually look like, though? Are they just sitting in a dark room reading printed bank statements?
No, it's a bit more advanced than that. Their mandate is heavily outlined in Cabinet Resolution number 134 of 2025, and it is incredibly broad and highly technical.
Okay.
First and foremost, they are designing the institution's entire AML and CFT program.
Meaning what exactly?
That means building the architectural methodology for how the company assesses its own risk across all its products, its customer base, and the geographic channels it operates in.
And from my understanding, it's not a, set it and forget it kind of operation. They are constantly tuning the transaction monitoring systems. Because when you think about the sheer volume of data, that is a monumental technical challenge. You have millions of transactions flowing through an exchange every single day.
Right.
The MLRO has to figure out the exact algorithm parameters that will flag a suspicious cross-border wire transfer without flagging 1,000 people just buying their morning coffee.
Yes, and it requires a deeply analytical, almost forensic approach to data. When the system does generate an alert, say, a newly opened corporate account suddenly moves a massive sum of money to a high-risk jurisdiction.
A red flag goes up.
A huge red flag.
Yeah.
The MLRO must personally review and scrutinize that data. They have to decide, under strict confidentiality, whether the activity warrants filing a suspicious transaction report in STR or a suspicious activity report in SAR directly with the Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU.
Okay, but what happens if they look at an alert and decide it's just a false alarm? They can't just hit delete and move on to the next one, can they?
They cannot. If they decide not to file a report, they are legally obligated to formally document their precise rationale for why they kept the transaction internal.
Oh, wow. So they have to prove why they didn't act.
Exactly. The burden of proof is always on the MLRO to justify inaction. In fact, the record-keeping requirements across the board are intense. The institution must retain all customer due diligence and transaction records for a minimum of 5 years.
5 years? That's a lot of data.
It is. Plus, the MLRO has to draft a comprehensive biannual compliance report, so twice a year, detailing the institution's overall compliance health.
And who does that go to?
That report goes directly to senior management and can be demanded by the regulators at literally any time to prove the system is working.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to push back on something here because this is where the rubber meets the road for me in real-world corporate environments.
Okay, go for it.
Let's say I'm the CEO of a fast-growing crypto platform. My sales team brings in a massive, highly lucrative potential client, a whale.
The kind that makes your quarter.
Exactly. It's going to make our whole year. But my MLRO reviews the file and says, absolutely not. The ownership structure is hidden behind 3 shell companies. The client is way too high risk. Do not onboard them.
Okay.
Is the MLRO's word absolute law? Can the CEO just override them and take the money anyway?
The guidance handles this with a brilliant piece of regulatory nuance. Technically, yes, senior management can overrule the MLRO and decide to onboard that high-risk customer.
Wait, really? Doesn't that completely defeat the purpose of having an independent watchdog? I mean, if the CEO can just say, thanks for your input, but we like money, why even have the role?
I know, it sounds like a massive loophole at first, but the catch fundamentally changes the power dynamic.
Okay, what's the catch?
If senior management decides not to follow the MLRO's advice, they are legally required to officially record their rationale. And they can't just write down a vague justification like, we assess the client and feel comfortable.
Right.
They must clearly, explicitly and formally document exactly how the institution is going to mitigate the specific risks that the MLRO flagged.
Oh, wow. So if I'm the CEO, by overriding my compliance officer, I am essentially putting my own signature on a document that says, I am personally taking responsibility for this massive risk, and here is my exact plan to prevent it from blowing up.
Exactly. It completely shifts the liability. It forces accountability right to the top, removing the shield of plausible deniability.
Because they can't pretend they didn't know.
Right. Imagine a boardroom 5 years later. The financial intelligence unit knocks on the door because that specific client turned out to be running a massive money laundering syndicate.
A nightmare scenario.
The regulators aren't going to blame the MLRO. They're going to pull that specific override document, point straight at the CEO's signature and say, you were warned by your own expert, you took the risk for profit, and your mitigation plan failed.
Wow.
It ensures that overriding the compliance officer is never done lightly or, in the shadows.
That boardroom scenario paints a terrifying picture of personal liability for executives. And of course, we know how this regulatory machine is supposed to work in a perfect, law-abiding world.
Which doesn't exist.
Right, which doesn't exist. Because the source material actually includes an Appendix 1, which is essentially a regulatory hall of shame.
Yes, it is.
It's this detailed list compiled by the supervisory authorities showing all the ways institutions are currently failing at this in the real world.
And it is a sobering read. I mean, the regulators aren't just theorizing about potential vulnerabilities. They are highlighting active, systemic failures they are finding during their on-site inspections.
And one of the biggest ones was?
One of the most glaring issues they highlight is the phenomenon of the phantom MLRO.
The in-name-only compliance officer.
Yeah. The guidance notes that in some firms, there is a complete absence of a dedicated, independent MLRO holding a senior position.
Or even worse, they found instances where the entire compliance program was outsourced to a regional group office in another country.
Which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
That leaves the local UAE operations completely hollowed out, with almost zero real oversight or local accountability on the ground.
Right. And the regulators also found MLROs who were being systematically cut out of the decision-making process for key controls.
Yes. Imagine having an MLRO, paying them a senior salary, but not letting them be involved in tuning the sanction screening software or the transaction monitoring algorithms.
So they are effectively blindfolded by the IT department.
Exactly. They can't report what their systems aren't designed to see.
And one of the scariest failures mentioned in Appendix 1 was a lack of oversight regarding freeze orders.
Oh, that's a critical one.
Because this isn't just about missing a suspicious transaction. This is about ignoring a direct, urgent command from the government.
Let's walk through how a freeze order actually works, just to understand the severity of that failure. If the FIU uncovers a terrorist financing cell, they will issue an immediate freeze order to financial institutions.
Okay.
The moment that order hits, the institution has to lock down those specific funds so the suspects can't withdraw the money and disappear.
But if the MLRO isn't actively tracking the implementation of that order, Or if, like, the internal communication between compliance and the banking operations team is slow, what happens?
A critical window of opportunity opens. A delay of even a few hours could mean illicit funds are transferred out of the jurisdiction into untraceable crypto wallets,
Yeah.
or just withdrawn as cash.
So the institution dragging its feet becomes complicit in letting terrorist funds escape.
Yes, a failure in oversight there shows a catastrophic lack of accountability.
Which brings up a very tempting shortcut for modern businesses, especially startups.
Outsourcing.
Exactly.
Right.
Imagine you are a lean, fast-moving fintech company. You have a small, brilliant team, and you want to focus entirely on product development and user growth.
As startups do.
Building this massive internal compliance machine with a senior MLRO, specialized software, and deep local knowledge, it sounds exhausting. It sounds extensive.
Very expensive.
Why can't you just call up a high-end third-party compliance firm and outsource this entire headache to them?
Well, this raises an important question, and the joint guidance draws an absolute non-negotiable boundary here. Under no circumstances may an institution outsource the role of the MLRO or the entire compliance function itself. Never.
Wow. Never. So you cannot just hire an external agency to be your MLRO on paper and, wash your hands of the daily responsibility.
No. The core responsibility, the ultimate judgment calls, and the liability, they must live inside your house.
Okay.
However, the regulators are pragmatic. They know that running a modern compliance department requires heavy lifting, and sometimes you need specialized help. So you are permitted to outsource specific, targeted AML compliance tasks.
Give me an example of what is allowed versus what crosses the line.
Okay, so you could hire an outside firm to run your annual AML training sessions for staff. That's fine.
Right.
You could bring in a specialized agency to conduct complex, enhanced due diligence investigations on, like, a really tricky corporate client with a tangled multinational ownership structure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or you could use a third-party vendor to provide the raw technical support and server infrastructure for your transaction monitoring software.
So you can outsource the legwork, the research, and the software maintenance, but the brain of the operation, the final sign-off on whether a client is safe to onboard or a transaction is suspicious, has to be your own employee.
Exactly. And even with that legwork, there is a major catch. Before you outsource any of those specific tasks, you must obtain a formal letter of no objection from your relevant supervisory authority.
You have to ask permission first.
Yes. You cannot just quietly hand off the work to a contractor in another country. The regulator needs to know exactly who is looking at your data and what their security protocols are.
The UAE regulators clearly aren't messing around with these guardrails, but it's important to remember they aren't just creating these strict rules in a vacuum to make life difficult for local startups.
No, not at all.
They are constantly aligning with global currents, specifically the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF.
Right. FATF is the global standard setter for combating financial crime. Now, they don't write direct micro-level rules for individual compliance officers.
Yes.
You won't find a FATF rule book telling a specific MLRO in Dubai what font to use on a report. Instead, they write the overarching international standards that national regulators, like the UAE Central Bank and VR, then translate into local enforcement.
So those incredibly strict fit and proper requirements for vetting an MLRO, or the absolute ban on outsourcing the core role, those are deeply rooted in maintaining the UAE's standing within FATF's global framework.
Exactly. And the source material highlights some very specific, very recent updates from FATF that are shifting the landscape right now. It specifically cites revisions happening in February and June of 2025.
Let's dig into those because this is where the tension gets really interesting.
Oh, it really does.
The guidance points to two specific areas. First, revisions to Recommendation 1, which focuses heavily on enhancing financial inclusion. And second, revisions to Recommendation 16, which is all about increasing transparency in cross-border payments.
It is the ultimate regulatory balancing act. Think about the definitions here. Enhancing financial inclusion means bringing more people, often marginalized, low-income or unbanked populations, into the formal financial system.
Right, making it accessible.
It means making it easier, cheaper, and faster for them to open accounts and move small amounts of money so they can participate in the modern economy.
But increasing transparency to stop fraud and illicit flows usually means the exact opposite.
It does.
It means more rules, more identity checks, more documentation, and a lot more friction. It's almost like airport security.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, the regulators are demanding higher security measures, saying to the TSA agents, who in this case are MLROs, hey, the threat level is elevated. We need you to thoroughly check every single bag for dangerous items.
But simultaneously,
Right. Simultaneously, they're pushing the financial inclusion mandate, saying you also need to make sure the line moves twice as fast so nobody misses their flight.
that analogy perfectly captures the daily reality of the compliance officer. Cross-border payments are incredibly difficult to track because they pass through long chains of correspondent banks across different countries.
Each with varying data privacy laws, I assume.
Exactly. These new FATF updates mean that MLROs must design their risk-based approaches to be incredibly precise, almost like a scalpel, to separate the innocent traveler from the threat.
Because if they use a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel, you get what the industry calls de-risking.
Yes, and de-risking is a massive problem. If your automated filters are too crude, it becomes too expensive and labor-intensive to individually verify low-income customers or small businesses in developing nations.
So what happens?
So institutions just block whole categories of legitimate people from getting bank accounts altogether. They de-risk. That destroys the goal of financial inclusion.
But if your filters are too loose to keep the lines moving fast, the dirty money slips through the cracks, and you get hit with massive fines for failing to maintain transparency.
This is why the role of the MLRO requires such exceptional judgment. The regulatory machinery we've discussed today directly impacts everyone listening to this.
It really does.
Whether you are a crypto trader frustrated because a massive transfer is taking 48 hours to clear, or a small business owner overwhelmed by the sheer volume of documents you have to provide just to open a commercial checking account, this framework is the reason why.
It really reframes the friction, doesn't it? When the bank asks you for the third time to prove the source of your funds, it's not because the teller is trying to annoy you.
No, they have to ask.
Knowing your customer KYC isn't just a corporate buzzword. It's a legal mandate. An MLRO somewhere has designed a rigorous program to ensure the institution isn't unwittingly funding a terrorist cell or a weapons program.
And they have to document every single step of your proof to satisfy the regulators.
Right. So the MLRO really is the essential independent shield protecting the integrity of the entire financial ecosystem.
They are. The regulators have given them the operational independence, the strict vetting, and the legal backing to stand up to their own CEOs to keep that ecosystem clean.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We talked about how fast money moves now and the intense pressure to keep legitimate financial lines moving quickly.
Right.
We also know that criminal networks are rapidly adopting things like artificial intelligence and automated technology to launder money globally at speeds we've never seen before. It is a technological arms race.
A rapidly accelerating one.
So here's the question. As the threats become completely automated, how will these human MLROs, who are bound by the strict, deeply analytical, and highly documented reporting requirements we just explored, how will they possibly keep pace?
That's a huge challenge.
Will financial institutions have to rely so heavily on AI to fight AI that they inadvertently freeze out the very people the new financial inclusion mandates are trying to help?
That is the fear, yeah.
Or can the human element of judgment, that fiercely protected independence we spent all this time talking about, actually survive the speed of the future?
It's the defining question for the next decade of global finance, and every institution is going to have to find an answer soon.
It really makes you look differently at that frictionless app on your phone. The magic is only possible because of the heavy, high-stakes filtration system grinding away beneath the surface. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.